With the recent Joao Pedro injury news and the worry of Trent's minutes going forward, we need to talk about what to do with these players and the potential best replacements alongside the other top transfers going into game week 21. So as always, if you look forward to today's video, make sure you do drop a like, aiming for 300 on this video. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure you do smash that subscribe button for daily fantasy content. And enough waffling, let's get into today's video. So first up, and possibly the most important thing that we need to take into account each and every game week going forward, are the upcoming double and blank game weeks. Now, I've taken this graphic here from FPL.team. Pete, if you're watching this, thank you for the graphic. Make sure you guys do check out FPL.team. And they're doing these fixtures in association with Planet FPL, who are doing projected fixtures. That is the big thing. These are projected fixtures. They haven't been officially announced yet, but we know there's going to be a double game week in either 24 or game week 25, so you can read into that what you will. Right now, we are projecting that to be in game week 24. So the reason why that's important is because if we are looking to sell people like Trent, if we're worried about the minutes, going away from Liverpool isn't going to benefit you when that double game week comes up in a few weeks' time. And also, of course, with Everton having a new manager very, very soon, that also could lean towards maybe getting yourself an Everton player. I just want to make sure you're aware of that upcoming double game weeks. That is a big factor you need to remember when buying or selling certain players from those teams. The other big one that we need to remember is, of course, blank game week 29. Now, that is going to be based on the EFL Cup finalists. So right now we are projecting, and I think it's probably fair to say, Liverpool to get to the final, even though they lost the first leg. I think we imagine they are going to overturn it in the Anfield fixture. So Liverpool versus Aston Villa will then become a double and projected to move into game week 33 for the double game week. And then, I think rightly so, we can now assume that Newcastle have a great chance of getting to the final. That will mean Newcastle versus Palace will become a blank in game week 29 and move to game week 33 as a double. Remember, these are projected fixtures. So with all that said, of course, we still haven't had the second leg featured. Things can happen. We also need to remember that if you're buying Newcastle players, if you're buying Palace players, you also need to remember in the back of your mind, there is a great possibility of them blanking in game week 29 based on what we've seen in that first leg. Again, some people might not care about that sort of far in the future, but I do know there are a lot of managers out there that like to know what the future is going to look like. And hopefully this section here does give you a little bit of help going forward. So should we be looking to sell Trent in our FPL teams? Well, firstly, I need to say, if you're in a position where you don't own Trent, I wouldn't put yourself through the headache and look to buy him in game week 21. I think the big factors, and I need to kind of give you an overarching theme right now, are why managers are potentially looking to sell Trent. That is a big thing we need to remember, is the return of Conor Bradley. And I think Conor Bradley does actually pose a problem for Trent going forward for minutes. Some managers think that Trent is absolutely locked in this Liverpool team. I think his performances have been bad enough to suggest Conor Bradley more than possible to come in for a certain amount of games, especially when you look at game week 23 at home against Ipswich, game week 25 at home against Wolves. And the big thing as well is the price point of Trent at 7.2 million. If you're paying that much money, I want guaranteed game time. That is the absolute guarantee that I need at that price point. Clean sheet potential, I think he offers that in that Liverpool team. But if he's not playing every game, then of course that diminishes. And of course attacking returns. And we can see that with Trent with the underlying numbers here. So Trent is only ticking one or two of those boxes right now. And it's 7.2 million. The great thing about him is that if you come off him, you get money in the bank to invest elsewhere in your FPL teams. And you might be in a position right now where you might have other problems that you need to address, but don't have the funds to do so. Trent gives you that out. So if you are going to sell Trent, I think you have to go to another Liverpool defender, as I've already mentioned, because the fixtures, even though they are a little bit middling, 23 is great at home against Ipswich. Game week 25 is great at home against Wolves, and we've already discussed that double game week in 24 or 25. So it makes no sense to firstly sell a Liverpool player to go to another team. Keep your assets in that Liverpool defence, because I think it is going to pay off over the long term. So the big question is it time to sell Trent? Well, I am very, very, very scared of owning Trent going forward. I probably am not as bullish as other managers. Do I think game week 21 is the time to sell him? I think the answer right now is going to be no. So we're going to have the FA Cup this weekend. If Conor Bradley plays in that game, I think we probably can point towards a start for Trent in game week 21. If Trent starts this weekend, then it really is up in the air who starts in that fixture. I think unless you have pressing issues in your team, for example, an injury in a forward line or midfield that you really need to upgrade, Trent down to Konate would be my choice. Yes, Konate is a little bit injury prone, but I haven't seen enough from Virgil van Dijk to suggest at 1.3 million extra, he is worth going to. I actually think he's probably one of the worst options available. I'd rather go all the way to Trent or all the way down to Konate. I don't see why you'd buy Virgil van Dijk. So Trent down to Konate this week can happen only if it frees up funds for you to make an additional move in your team. Otherwise, even though I don't love Trent as an FPL option, if you own him, I would keep for game week 21 and then reassess going forward. I think you could even sell him in 22 or 23 if you are really scared of his minutes and look to upgrade certain players. For example, in game week 22, Trent down to Konate to then maybe upgrade a forward to Chris Wood is a very popular move I can see a lot of managers doing. So to conclude, Konate is the pick right now in terms of a value pick. If you don't own Trent, don't buy. I would get Konate. If you own Trent, I would keep for one more week and then reassess based on that performance and, of course, how Liverpool are looking defensively going forward. Finally, we need to look at potential Joao Pedro replacements because he is a doubt going into game week 21. For those that have missed the news, he is going for an MRI scan on an ankle injury. He's been ruled out for the FA Cup game this weekend, and I would say that cast doubts about him featuring on Thursday for them in game week 21, which is really frustrating because they do have a decent fixture away against Ipswich. Now, we have to consider alternatives because if we don't get the news on Joao Pedro, we can do one or two things. We either start him and then you have a good first sub if he doesn't feature. If you have a terrible bench, you might be more inclined to sell him. You, of course, take the risk if he actually is okay, but we need to look at alternatives. I'm not going to include the likes of Mateta and Chris Wood because they are more expensive, considerably more expensive. That is for another subject. Ones that you possibly can afford are going to include Delap, Raul Jimenez and Visser. Slightly more expensive at 6.2 million, but I think he needs to be in the conversation nonetheless. So first up, Delap at 5.6 million. Underlying numbers have been great, and I do think his minutes going forward are going to continue to be good. If Ipswich want to stay in this league, they need this man on the field, and I do think he is going to be consistent going forward for those minutes. And the numbers are great, 0.48 expected goals per 90. And yes, he isn't really doing much outside of that, but I want the goal scorer in that team. The problem, of course, with Delap is he is playing for Ipswich. Yes, they've had a few good results over the last few weeks, but can I see that continuing? Well, Brighton at home, not a great fixture. City at home in 22. Liverpool away in game week 23. Southampton is amazing in 24, but then Villa and Spurs. Yes, there are home games in there, and I do think Delap could score, but do I just think they are considerably worse as a team than the ones they're featuring and in any moment could just lose 3-0? I think the answer is going to be yes there. So I do like Delap at 5.6 and being on penalties is great, but sometimes I don't love buying the forward in a team that I can't expect to score in many goals, and Delap kind of falls in that spot. Raul Jimenez on the other hand. Now, we've had this problem with Raul each and every week. We think he's going to get rotated with Muniz, and it does happen, but Raul then when he comes back into the team scores 0.58 expected goals per 90 and on penalties and 1.02 big chances per 90 is great. In terms of the fixtures, not great. West Ham away is now even more difficult with a new manager in charge in Graham Potter. Leicester away in game week 22 I think great. United at home in 23 I think is good. But then Newcastle away, not fantastic. Forest at home, equally not that good. And even Palace at home, I can't really say that's an amazing fixture. Now, the numbers are good for Raul. I think you can absolutely go there. But with the risk of Muniz coming in at any moment and the fixtures not being incredible, I also don't love buying Raul Jimenez going into game week 21. Finally, Visser. Now, the entry point for Visser is horrendous. City at home, Liverpool at home, then Palace away. Doesn't really feel like a great time to buy him. But when you look at the numbers, 0.62 expected goals per 90 is great. 1.1 bonus per 90 is fantastic. And he's putting up over one big chance per game. And I could see him getting those big chances in that Man City game who are so susceptible to transitions. Damsgaard running through the middle. I can see it now. However, you're paying more for Visser at 6.2 million. And I just can't sit here right now and say to you Visser is a better pick than that of Raul Jimenez. So to conclude, I think if I had to sell Joao Pedro right now, it would be to Raul Jimenez. I think that is where I would go. I do think Delap is a good pick, but I just think part of me thinks it's still Ipswich, and I could see them equally losing the next 6 games or the next 5 games apart from the Southampton one easily. So I think Raul Jimenez is the one to go for, but based on this conversation right now, I also feel like maybe just allowing game week 21 to happen with Joao Pedro if you have a good enough first bench. For example, I've got Semenyo away against Newcastle. I'm happy just to start Joao Pedro unless he's completely ruled out. Have Semenyo come in for game week 21 and then reassess in game week 22 onwards, because that might allow you to free up some funds in the bank to then go for a bit more of a premium forward than some of these. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, but that's where my stance is right now. So next up, is Bruno Fernandes a buy going into game week 21? Now, I'm a manager that currently owns him, and I'm really glad to be owning him. I don't envy managers that don't own him right now, because I really do think he is a bit of an FPL headache. So hopefully this section can kind of iron out a few things and make it a bit more clear whether you should be buying him into your FPL team. So I'll try to divide it up here in terms of pros and cons for him. So first and foremost, the underlying numbers have been pretty solid this season. 0.37 expected goals per 90, 0.27 expected assists per 90 minutes. And it goes without saying that when he does get an attack and return, he is always in and amongst the bonus points because he does so much good stuff for the team. It ticks a lot of the boxes for the FPL bonus point system. So he is great. Whenever he gets attack and return, you could basically add on 1 additional point for a bonus. And we saw that in that Liverpool game. He has by far and away the best game week 21 fixture at home against Southampton. Now, on one narrative, one would say Amorim's turned the tide at United now and they're going to go on a fantastic run. On the other hand, we have seen this countless times. United players get up for a big game and then really struggle in these games they're expected to win. You can only look back to a team like Bournemouth at home where they lost 3-0. I would put Southampton, though, in the category of possibly even a derby of years gone by. I really do think the Southampton team is the worst team in the league. I would say Leicester are better than them right now, and Ipswich clearly better than Southampton. So even with Man United's problems and their dysfunctions, I still think this is a brilliant fixture, regardless of the status of United right now. And the one thing I would say is, well, regardless of how United play, I always feel like Bruno Fernandes can just score at any time. And we've seen over the last few weeks how managers have been praising the likes of Joao Pedro and Raul Jimenez for scoring, but they've all been from the penalty spot. And he offers exactly that. Guaranteed minutes on penalties and a bit of a talisman in that United team. So I think he's brilliant for game week 21. The problem, and I've put this here, United are so unpredictable right now, and I think the fixtures are a little bit middling. I think game week 21 and 22 are great. I think they are good fixtures for United. Game week 23, really difficult. We've seen a lot of teams struggle against Fulham this year. And then Palace at home in game week 24. Again, Palace feel like they've slightly turned a tide, not as easy as what it once was. And then 25 and 26 could be anything from 5-3 against Spurs to getting battered, and then also a 0-0 against Everton, even though Sean Dyche has now left. So I really don't envy managers that are looking to bring in Bruno Fernandes. And the other big problem right now, of course, is there are cheaper alternatives available. We got someone like an Anthony Gordon at 0.7, 0.8 million cheaper. That feels better fixtures and a bit more less risk about the actual pick because you feel confident about the team. So would I be buying Bruno Fernandes right now? I probably wouldn't. I think he's fantastic if you own him. He'll be a brilliant differential for your teams. But would I be ripping up my team to get there? Probably not. The only thing that I would say as a caveat is if you're sat there right now with Martin Odegaard, then I would be very tempted to bring in Bruno Fernandes for maybe a couple of game weeks and then look to pivot away. That's the one thing I would say about Bruno is because of his price point, I feel like you are going to eventually want to ship him on to a cheaper option as we progress through these fixtures. And then you've got to ask yourself, is it worth a transfer just for this one game week in isolation? I think no, as I think it could be a cheaper Man United option available to us that would save you a bit of money. So on the subject of cheap midfielders, they have been such a talking point this season. It feels like we have been quite blessed with a lot of good options, but none that have really stood out as a Cole Palmer that we saw last season. So the 4 going into game week 21 that I would argue are kind of the exciting ones are going to be Jacob Murphy at Newcastle, Alanga at Nottingham Forest, Ahmad at Man United, and of course Morgan Rogers at Aston Villa. And Morgan Rogers is the one that really does feel like every week he has been the standout cheap midfielder, but each week there are always shiny new toys that we try and compare against him. So I want to do that in this section because, as I discussed about Bruno Fernandes, at that price point, for some managers, it does actually disrupt the structure of their team. And actually, keeping that cheap midfielder spot in their team is actually really, really important, as it allows you to have maybe a more expensive forward. And I still think having the fifth midfielder in your team as a cheap midfielder is the way to go. But of course, you play a game how you want to. So just to give a quick rundown right now, Murphy's priced at 5.1, Ahmad at 5.3, Elanga at 5.2, and Morgan Rogers at 5.5. So Rogers is slightly more expensive than the other three that we are comparing right now. So just running across the board here, Jacob Murphy at 5.1 has been really, really interesting. And also a bit of an alternative to someone like an Anthony Gordon, where he's getting a lot of traction right now. 5.1 million compared to Gordon's 7.7, 7.8 price bracket is a big saving. And one thing I would say about Jacob Murphy is when he plays, his numbers are really good. 0.26 expected goals per 90, 0.34 expected assists. Really solid numbers. You can see here, of all of the players here, he actually has the highest expected FPL points per 90 at 5.4. The one negative, or a couple of negatives in the underlying numbers, is his bonus point really isn't there. So he is a player that does come off early, historically. I do think his starts have been fantastic, and if Newcastle don't dip into the transfer market and buy any sort of competition on that right wing, I still think Jacob Murphy is the standout option in this Newcastle team. But of course, you need to monitor the transfer window, because of all the players that we have on our screens here, I would see he is the most likely of maybe getting rotated if somebody does come in that Newcastle team. So you are taking into account minutes risk, whereas I'll say the other three are going to be way more locked into their respective teams. But I do think Jacob Murphy is a really exciting option, especially with these fixtures coming up. Wolves, Bournemouth, Southampton, Fulham, even Man City away is not terrible, and then Forest at home in game week 26. Remember that potential blank in game week 29. So if you own Gordon, I wouldn't be going for a double up in the likes of Murphy, because you probably already have Alexander Isak. But if you're buying fresh right now and you have to rip up your teams to get to a Gordon, then I think Jacob Murphy is a perfectly fine alternative. I wouldn't be scared to go there. Now, in terms of Elanga, this is one that's got a bit of traction right now. In terms of the numbers, 0.25 expected goals per 90, 0.17 expected assists, solid underlying numbers. And the one thing I will say is that he has been very, very consistent over the past month. So he probably is one of the form players. In terms of the fixtures coming up for Forest, Liverpool at home, I don't think we're as scared as what we should have been. I think that's actually an okay fixture. Then Southampton at home, which really is the money fixture. Then Bournemouth, Brighton, Fulham, Newcastle. I don't mind Elanga. I think he actually is quite a nice differential, and his numbers have been ticking over okay. But I would prefer Jacob Murphy myself than that of Elanga. I think there are more goals in this Newcastle team, and I just think Elanga is one of those players that could be a bit of a purple patch. I might be wrong, but I'm not as convinced on someone like an Elanga, especially when we have someone like Ahmad at 5.3 million. Now, Man United's fixtures, as we spoke about with Bruno Fernandes, are not too bad. 3 of the next 4 at home, but United, you'd argue, in comparison to Newcastle and Forest, are so damn unpredictable. 1 minute they're drawing against Liverpool, next they could lose against Southampton. I don't think that will be the case. However, when Ahmad does play, you can see the numbers aren't amazing compared to the others. 0.19 expected goals per 90, 0.21 expected assists. However, since Amarin's been in charge, he has been guaranteed minutes. And if you have that narrative in your head right now, that Man United have turned a corner and we are going to see good stuff from them going forward, I think there always will be the risk at times. If Man United are going to dominate the ball, they might play Ahmad as one of the wing backs in the system. But as of right now, I feel like he is the man on the right-hand side of that front three. And as that remains, with that Southampton game at home in game week 21, I think he's a brilliant pick for your team. So we will come to a bit of a ranking at the end, don't worry. Finally, Rogers, the man that we're always comparing others up against. 5.5 million, and the next 2 aren't ideal. Everton, of course, are a team that have got a new manager. Then game week 22 away against Arsenal. So I would argue if you bring in Rogers, he's probably going to sit on your bench for the next few weeks. But then after that, West Ham, who will have a new manager, it's worth noting, in Graham Potter. Then Wolves, who have got a new manager. Then Ipswich, and then Chelsea. I would say I'm less excited about the Aston Villa fixtures, and of course, you are buying a player that will potentially blank in game week 29 based on the projections. Remember, that is the same for that of Jacob Murphy. But I do think Morgan Rogers is the safest pick of the bunch. So, to conclude, I think if you want to play it safe, I still think Morgan Rogers is the man. He's guaranteed minutes. He's proven over the last 20 game weeks, and I think he is going to tick over really nicely in teams. Outside of him, I think if I had to pick one, it probably would be Jacob Murphy. I think it would be Jacob Murphy. Yes, I am a little bit concerned about them dipping into the transfer market, and that is my huge concern about him. But if that wasn't to happen, I think Jacob Murphy is the pick. Then it would be Ahmad, and then it would be Elanga. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Yes, guys, okay, that is going to wrap up today's video, looking at the top transfers going into game week 21. I am certain I have missed some big players. So if I have done so, please do let me know in the comment section. I'll be sure to get to them. And it's worth noting, this is the first of daily content between now and game week 21. We'll be dropping a wildcard team. We'll be doing a preview, team selection. So we'll be covering off a lot more hot topics over the next few days, so there's no better time than ever to make sure you are subscribed to the channel. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you do drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Cheers.